on conversation on orienting youth development strategies to young people's realities. So today's event brings together in a strategic policy conversation the National Youth Development Agency, a young entrepreneur and beneficiary of a youth entrepreneurship program, and contributing authors to Mistra's 2021 research volume, Youth in South Africa. I hope. Can people turn off, unmute their mics? Yeah. So here is the book that this conversation is a post-launch activity of. So at Mistra, we have what we call priority research programs, and they culminate in these books. You can't really see it because it's similar to there we are. It culminates in these books. And after we launch the books, we like to do a series of public engagements, launches, conversations with policymakers, public engagements that are similar to launches, but not really launches as conversations, just keeping the discussion going around the findings of our research programs or of our research project. So this is just one of those kind of post-launch activities. And as I said, it brings together, some of our authors that contributed to this particular book. It also brings together some colleagues from the National Youth Development Agency and a young entrepreneur. So I will introduce each of our panelists as just as they come in. We'll just straight get into it in the interest of time. So our first speaker is Dumi Makgetla, who is a lecturer in African politics in the Jackson Institute at Yale University and a co-author with Lauren Graham, who is also with us on the call, at the center, who is at the Center of Social Development in Africa at UJ. This is Lawrence Graham. So they co-wrote a chapter, which is titled Post-1994 Youth Policy Trajectory in Mistra's edited volume. Take it away, Dumi.
Hi, so I'm going to start the video. So the co-host stopped my video. So I'm unable to start it. So I can start, but I'm unable. Okay, so it has to start my video. Great. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Dumi Makgetla. Sorry, I have a bit of a scratchy voice this morning, but I'm really pleased to be part of this conversation to share some of the insights that Lauren Graham and I had in developing a chapter for the book. So the title of the short input I'm making today is Post-94 Policy Landscape, Key Recommendations for Mainstreaming Youth. And so this input is based on the chapter that we wrote on the trajectory of youth policy after 94. And this chapter focuses on youth policy design and how the elements of national youth policies have changed over time and what this implies about the relationship between young people in the state. But for today's discussion, I'm really just going to focus on mainstreaming in youth policy and some of the insights that we developed about what might support successful mainstreaming and how mainstreaming has been thought of in different contexts that we developed in the course of writing this chapter. So, I don't have slides. So just to give you an outline, which I will try to stick to, there are really four sort of topics that I'm going to talk about. And the first is, what is policy mainstreaming? What is the definition that we're operating with? And then I'll talk through a little bit about the challenges associated with mainstreaming that were identified, especially in the context of mainstreaming gender policy, which is where the idea really developed initially. And then I'll talk about what this means for youth policy. And lastly, tie this into the relevance of this discussion about mainstreaming and successful mainstreaming for youth entrepreneurship specifically. Okay, so what is policy mainstreaming? What do we understand that to mean? We hear a lot about policy mainstreaming as best practice, especially in the context of cross-cutting policy issues like youth, gender, but also topics like environmental sustainability. And generally speaking, the objective is to ensure that multiple departments tackle a policy objective holistically. It's a response to this concern that where you have multiple actors working to achieve the same goal, it's very easy for those actors just to treat it as a checklist, an add-on, something that they're not really integrating into the main work of the department or the agency. And in the context of youth policy, there's a publication by the Commonwealth Secretariat called Youth Mainstreaming and Development that provides a definition of what youth mainstreaming is or what it means to mainstream youth policy. And this is a long quote, but I'll unpack it after reading it. So they call youth mainstreaming strategies for intergenerational equity and justice that enable young people's capabilities, participation, and human rights to be an integral dimension of the analysis, design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of policies and programs in intersectoral planning across all social, political, and economic spheres. It enables young people and adults to benefit equally from and contribute equally to development outcomes. This, they're very explicit about, is based on the definition of gender mainstreaming that came from the report of the Economic and Social Council of the UN in 1997. And so the reason I'm going to reflect a bit on, how gender mainstreaming has been understood is because that was the basis very explicitly for concepts of mainstreaming youth policy. So, that's a long definition to read out if you don't have it in front of you. So just to unpack it, to highlight a few elements of it. First, it really focuses on multiple stages of policy development. So it's not just about implementation. It's about the analysis, design, implementation, and monitoring evaluation of policies and programs. Secondly, the definition underscores the fact that looking at multiple dimensions of policy. So in that definition, we have a discussion of intersectoral planning across all social, political, and economic spheres. And lastly, mainstreaming is understood as strategies for intergenerational equity and justice. So, they really underscore that that's the goal, intergenerational equity and justice. Mainstreaming is the means, right? It's really easy to get caught up in mainstreaming because it can be quite complex. But the goal is intergenerational equity and justice, which means that we need an idea of generational difference. And I'll come back to this. So when we look to the experience of gender mainstreaming, Mary Daly has a good piece on gender mainstreaming in theory and practice. And she contrasts gender mainstreaming with other approaches to promoting gender equity. And that is anti-discrimination efforts that focus on individuals and rights and positive action to address deficiencies and disadvantages that result in different outcomes for women. And in contrast, gender mainstreaming was meant to focus on the systems, processes, and norms that generate gender inequality. But there's been a wide variation in how gender mainstreaming is understood across countries. And she emphasizes that although it has its roots in feminist theories, it's often implemented by governments because it's fashionable. And so there isn't this deeper understanding of how gender inequality arises is a structural phenomenon. So some of the challenges are gender mainstreaming is often seen as a process, and it becomes synonymous with interdepartmental coordination, which means maybe just setting targets and quotas and leaving it at that. And an alternative approach would be to encourage departments to develop an analysis of their role in the social production of gender inequality. So I think I have about 5 minutes left. What does this mean for youth policy, right? So we're taking these insights from some of the challenges and way gender mainstreaming has been understood and thinking about the context of youth. So many documents, national youth policies in South Africa, international agencies talking about youth policies tend to frame mainstreaming as coordination across departments and different implementing actors. Instead, this sort of critique of gender mainstreaming suggests that you might want to focus on supporting departments to understand how their work affects intergenerational inequality. And this has implications for how youth policy is framed, right? It implies that youth agencies should play a role in helping departments understand the social construction of youth and then empowering them to develop policies and responses to support young people. So what does this mean? This means that youth policies would be less of a set of directives for other departments, and it's less about coordinating a set of predefined tasks in a policy documents. And it's more about sharing analytic tools and supporting departments to work with young people to understand how those departments affect intergenerational inequality. So either perpetuate it and can help support alleviating it. And so currently, national youth policies tend to include a list of directives towards departments. And one of the concerns there is that if a department succeeds in implementing those directives, there's no pressure on them to consider the impact of what they do for young people more broadly, right? But it's that kind of reflection that might generate policy responses that are likely to have an effect. And it's that kind of engagement that youth policies should seek to stimulate. And that also can help to generate a sense of collective ownership of youth policy, which might therefore, increase the probability of implementation. And so again, it's not just about identifying problems that young people have, but developing an analysis of how age and age works. So lastly, to bring this into the context of youth entrepreneurship. So what is this? I'm talking about gender mainstreaming, the critiques, what this means for youth policy, but then specifically, what could this mean for thinking about youth entrepreneurship? It's clear that coming out of this, we might have policy suggestions that will involve or require multiple actors to engage to achieve a single goal. But the insights from the challenges of mainstreaming suggest that to effectively mainstream policy, we'll want to engage relevant actors to understand how their work affects intergenerational inequality. So as an example, it's not just about the fact that young people might have low access, the few young people might have access to startup capital. Lots of people lack access to startup capital, and the majority of South Africans are youth. Rather, we might be wanting to ask, what is it about the way societies construct youth that makes it more challenging for them relative to people who are older to engage as entrepreneurs? And so how can actors involved in supporting entrepreneurs adopt a youth lens in their policy to inform how they operate? And so instead of simply telling these actors that they should dedicate X% of their portfolios to young people, the lessons from mainstreaming suggest that integrating youth as a policy objective into departmental work means a broader engagement within departments to incorporate a youth angle into their understanding and ultimately their policy. And that may entail additional work, such as having engagements with young people and other actors to really develop that insight and make sure it's grounded in people's real experiences. And again, just to reiterate, going back to that initial definition that I shared of what mainstreaming can entail, this means integrating youth and an age-based analysis into the analysis, design, implementation, and monitoring evaluation of policies and programs. So it's sort of all stages of policymaking. Okay, and then if I can bounce to the last slide. So yeah, by way of conclusion, this input raises the idea of mainstreaming not only as coordination, but as an instrument, as a way to help implementing partners engage with young people and to develop a youth lens. And so, in the course of doing that, you'd also then want to share with all of the relevant implementing actors the best practices of national youth policy. So supporting people to operate with a youth as assets framework and not a youth as deficits approach. And to work with them to build their understanding, to work with young people to advance their interests. And in the chapter, we acknowledge that it may seem less satisfying to say that mainstreaming means, kicking it to another process, engaging with departments or pushing some of the detail of implementation to subsequent policies, instead of deciding in the body of a policy all of the interventions that departments should make. But ultimately, we're hopeful, and we think maybe the insights into the experience of gender mainstreaming suggest that this process may result in measures that are more likely to succeed in working with young people to support their development. So I think that's me at 10 minutes. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dumi. Our next speaker is Wasim Karim, who is CEO of the National Youth Development Agency. Please take it away, Wasim.
Thanks, Njabulo, and thanks to all of the colleagues who are joining us today for this webinar. So I'm going to share my presentation. Let me just put it on presentation mode. I think part of today's discussion is around youth entrepreneurship. So I really just like to share some of the statistics internally that we see, as well as some linkages and correlations between the formal market, the informal market, employment and entrepreneurship in South Africa. Yeah. So, and then I think I'm not going to focus too much on NYDA's interventions. We do have a speaker after me who will look at that. But I want to more look at the global environment in our local context. And if we look at South Africa on the official statistics, where we measure total entrepreneurial activity, particularly for young people, we see that we have lower rates of entrepreneurial participation than the rest of the world, but also relative to our African counterparts, we have lower amounts of participation. We see that young men are more likely to be entrepreneurs than young women. And then we also see that who've completed secondary education have a better chance of succeeding in entrepreneurship. A very controversial topic, but in general, we do see that South African township youth are not necessarily responding to the full potential of business opportunities in their own communities. Proportionally, immigrants have responded more effectively to both employment and business. And you'll see in my upcoming slides is that while the formal sector is important for growth, we find employment in the informal sector. But in terms of our labor force participation, we see that young people are not necessarily widely involved in self-employed activities or informally employed in micro enterprises. Generally, from the trends that we see that in South Africa, young people tend to navigate towards sectors that they know. So you'll find that the majority of young South Africans are running internet cafes, or they're producing music at home, DJing at taverns and shebeens, they're designing flyers and posters, they're operating gyms, and they're running takeaways that sell fast food. We find that the majority of these are owned by young South Africans. What do we know? We know that COVID, the conservative estimates tell us we lost anywhere between 1 million to 2 million jobs during the pandemic. Many of those have bounced back, but we know that there are some jobs which are gone forever. And that while the formal sector remains an critical, it cannot give us all of the answers to the growing numbers of the unemployed. As much as it is critical to keep the formal sector afloat, we have to equally innovate on ideas to support and sustain the informal sector. We need to support informal trainers using innovation. They must thrive with proper support, such as access to platforms and market linkages. The COVID-19 crisis highlighted the critical importance of the informal sector income generation. Just last batch of statistics, our research shows that of the roughly 1.8 million small and medium enterprises, less than 1/3 are led by youth, and slightly more than 1/3 of that are headed by women. The most common informal sector occupations for young men are taxi drivers and motor vehicle mechanics. For young women, beauticians and street food vendors. If we support these young men and women, it will help us to drive a more inclusive recovery. And if we don't, livelihood, the poverty gap will grow and our inequality will increase. With some of our partners in the youth employment space, the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, the Youth Employment Service, some insights that we see around the labor market. If we look around the employment collapse during COVID, you might look at it and say it looks like a story of just a blanket labor market contraction. But if you do a deeper dive, you might find that you see acceleration of what we call the reshaping of demand that has really just been underway for decades. Our heavy industries in the past, mining, agriculture, and manufacturing, is decreasing as a share of our GDP. All of these have shrunk by double-digit percentages since 1994. But against that, we see the potential for new job creation. The contraction of the formal labor market results in increased informalization of economic activity. And what we also see is sunrise sector have the potential to grow and absorb young people. The most obvious sunrise sectors are those that we call industries without smokestacks, including financial, business, and community. Manufacturing allows us to employ large numbers of moderate skilled labor, allowing us to absorb young people at scale. And also we see that these sectors are undergoing rapid digital transformation at global level. For example, what we see in the digital ICT and global businesses services sector is that right now, with the right kind of interventions, we can fill 60,000 high-skilled digital job vacancies in the immediate. And even though agriculture's share of GDP is on the wane, agro-processing and horticulture contribute 15% towards formal employment. Another sector that has the high potential for growth is early childhood development, health, and community, social, and personal services. These are the second largest absorber of young people, and a partnership between the private sector, civil society, and the public sector mean that already income is generated in the sector. Already there is subsidized value for ECD centers. What we require is support to micro enterprises and creating the micro linkages, accreditations for them so they are able to absorb that already existing demand for services. The last 2 points that I'd like to make is that our state employment incentive infrastructure, if we look at our tax incentives, our credits, our training programs, it was built for an era of heavy industry, corporate stability, and very large, complex value chains. We need to redesign these incentives for a future of work that supports small, medium, and micro enterprises. The latest QLSFS data shows that the majority of job losses occurred in the SMME sector, with about 70% of those in age 15 to 44 years. If we look at our employment incentives, they need to be recalibrated for greater administrative ease if SMMEs are to take advantage of them. For example, we know that the Youth Employment Service has shown the capacity of private sector to contribute to employment growth in the country. YES has reached 70,000 young people since its existence or since its launch 2.5 years ago. But for example, if we were allow small businesses to participate in the YES program, sidestepping the costly QSE verification process, we believe that number could be up to 200,000 jobs per annum. If we look across the economy at large, skills development levies provide many opportunities to facilitate inclusive hiring, but they are administratively difficult to claim. They do not target the most vulnerable youth, and they bias towards tertiary and graduate young people. If we recalibrate our system of skilling incentives, corporates and industry associations to hire the most experienced youth. Chairperson, in conclusion, South Africa is on a path of structural transformation. Our data shows us which industries and sectors are rising, as well as how to retool our employment interventions for maximum effectiveness. If we do that, we create momentum for the digitization of government processes, which in itself will allow further opportunities for work experience and for employment of young people at scale. We track our effectiveness at unlocking job growth from these sunrise sectors. It becomes an important lens to embed our work in part of the coalition commitment to deliver on the promises contained in the State of the Nation address. Program Director, thank you very much. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Wasim. Our next speaker is Eli Yanakaris, who is an entrepreneurship specialist and business mentor. Please take it away, Eli.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to be part of this very important and very interesting discussion. Firstly, just a thank you to the speakers who were before me. I think this is one of the most efficient panels I've been on. Everyone is sticking to time and has had really interesting insights to share. Perhaps just to start by saying, my name is Eli Yanakaris, and I've been in the youth entrepreneurship development sector for about 13 years now. But perhaps what also qualifies me to be in this space, and why I was also asked to contribute to this chapter, is I've had entrepreneurship experience myself. So it's a very valuable position to be in, to be supporting and developing entrepreneurs, but also then to have had that practical experience yourself. I think it gives you some really important insights into it. And I'm going to start just by saying that I really loved what Tumi said around how important it is to adopt a youth lens to entrepreneurship. And I think that's fundamentally why we're all here today, and essentially what is going to be key to really helping to drive an entrepreneurial ecosystem in this country that really supports young people. And I'm going to use the example of the Raymond Academy today. The Raymond Academy is a program that was based still is based at the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Business, as well as the University of Johannesburg. And it was an initiative that was started in 2008 as a collaboration between Mr. Raymond Academy, who's a very successful retail entrepreneur in South Africa, who started with UK. And at the time, this was just when policy and government was starting to see entrepreneurship as an opportunity and as a strategy for job creation. And so it was a really interesting case study to be able to go back and see as one of the first entrepreneurial initiatives, what did it do to impact the young people who went through the program, and if it did have a significant impact on the young people, how did it do so? But why that was particularly interesting was that the young people who could, it was a selection program, but it was open and subsidized by Mr. Academy specifically for young people who were not in employment, education, or training. So I think those who are most vulnerable to unemployment and potentially, we all know the situation for a lot of young people in this country. So it was a really valuable study in understanding what is it and how can we better support young people to put them on pathways to income and to earning livelihoods and sustainable livelihoods, because ultimately we all want young people who can participate. And so the chapter in the book was based on that Orienting case study. And just to start by saying there were 3 significant outcomes in looking at the Raymond Academy for young people, or for participants in that program. The one was an increased entrepreneurial mindset. The second was that they were more economically active, not necessarily by starting a business, but in getting a job as well as starting a business. And thirdly, there was increased personal income for themselves as well as their household. So those outcomes were really significant, and we really wanted to understand them. So it was a combination of program factors that did actually lead to that. But what that then, through this research, allowed us to do was to see, well, looking forward in terms of, entrepreneurship is not a magic bullet. It's not necessarily going to solve our unemployment crisis, but there certainly are lessons we can take as we prepare for what people might like to call the new economy, or the digital economy, or the post-COVID economy. How can we better support young people and actually do entrepreneurship education that works? So today I'm not focusing on policy necessarily. I know that, government and various actors in the policy environment, there's many initiatives and different tools that we can use to really enhance policy, to, for example, again, adopt a youth lens, provide better infrastructure and policy support. But I'm going to look at some of the nuts and bolts around entrepreneurship education and how we can possibly look at doing that. Because ultimately, if we're wanting a more entrepreneurially minded young population, I think it really does start with entrepreneurship education and trying to bring that in as early as possible. So I'm going to share with you today 5 considerations based on the chapter in the book. And these were based on the RA case study, but we've also since done additional research that really helps to enhance and also validate some of these considerations. And I'm hoping that you will all find this very interesting and maybe give some thought to if you are involved in the entrepreneurship space, perhaps you're doing this already, and not also to say that it's not necessarily the only 5. I think there are definitely considerations, but these were some that were significant and from part of the recommendations from the chapter. So number 1 is, I think this is one of my favorite sayings, is that entrepreneurship takes time, patience, and a village. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that we would really like to encourage more young people to start their businesses. However, it does take time, and it does require patience, not only from the young person themselves, but also as an ecosystem and a network. I always used to say, when young people come through an entrepreneurial development program, the journey really only starts once they finish. And that's where the village comes in. I think it really requires a multifaceted, high touch and longer term approach. And very importantly, that it is contextually relevant in approach and design. We know that we have very different environments and communities that young people come from, and different realities. And I think this is where it becomes very important that entrepreneurship is very much contextually relevant, but also looks at what are the market opportunities and pathways to income that are relevant within the communities or the geographic areas in which people do find themselves. And so that's also where the village comes in. I think it's very important to support entrepreneurs, as they're aspiring to start or grow businesses, it's really around mentorship, it's around having peer support, it's around having community support, and it's not a straight journey. So I think this is where the village becomes really important. Second thing is that sometimes it's really around teaching through entrepreneurship rather than for entrepreneurship. And I think originally when the policy back in the early 2000s around developing entrepreneurial strategies was around how do we create more businesses that then create more jobs. And I think what's important to perhaps consider now is that entrepreneurship, the skills that you can teach around entrepreneurial skills can really help to develop a mindset that can be used in a variety of different ways. So when you're developing somebody who has an entrepreneurial mindset, they are more adaptable, they are more optimistic, they generally are more resilient, and those are skills that can be applied in various different environments as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneurial-minded employee, that's in full-time work or even gig work. And so I think that's where teaching through entrepreneurship becomes really important because it can be used in a variety of different contexts.
Ellie?
Yes.
Sorry, we're battling to hear you. The sound's just coming and going slightly. Perhaps just move a little closer to your mic. Perhaps
Does that help? I'll speak a little bit louder.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. My third consideration is that high impact entrepreneurship education is really based on multiple factors. And I think what becomes important is looking at not only business skills and personal development work, but that it becomes staff who are really supportive. And very importantly, and was shown by the Raymond Academy case study, was it was financial as well as emotional support that really did enable and empower the participants as they started their entrepreneurial journey. So I think teaching content is one thing, but it's looking at programs that have multiple factors that are stacked on top of each other to really support foundational work. And I think a combination of program elements, design becomes very important too. We're starting to see that digital literacy, financial literacy, all of these things combined with entrepreneurial mindset really to empower young people for searching new pathways. My fourth consideration is that entrepreneurship is hard, and this is also where the patience comes in. I think we need to develop skills that also will support entrepreneurial well-being, emotional intelligence, resilience, stress tolerance. As I said, entrepreneurship really starts once you actually get practically into the field, and that's where the realities often hit. And sometimes the emotional well-being of our young people who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs, they're often expected to manage that on their own. So I think developing skills that will really help with entrepreneurial self-management, as I said, the resilience, and just dealing with the flexibilities of entrepreneurship really important. So that entrepreneurial well-being becomes essential. And then lastly, to say that entrepreneurship is evolving. I think we often used to have the traditional view of someone starting a business. Maybe now it's even transformed to we'd love people to start the next big tech venture. We'd love young people to start entrepreneurial businesses that are employing multiple other young people. But I think what we're seeing as we move into new and digital economies is that there are different ways of being entrepreneurial. And it's rather that entrepreneurship mindset that allows you to see different opportunities that can be applied at various stages in their careers. So also understanding that you don't have to be an entrepreneur now or forever. You don't have to be an employee now or forever. But having that entrepreneurial mindset can allow you to see different opportunities. Maybe you will be a solo entrepreneur working in the gig economy. Maybe you'll be what we like to call a social entrepreneur now, which is using social commerce and social networks to be able to be entrepreneurial. So I think there are many, many different opportunities that are coming ahead in the future as the future of work changes that are going to allow people to use those entrepreneurial skills in different ways in different contexts. And I think that's important that we teach that it's a mindset. It's not something that you're doing because you can't find a job. It really is a fundamental skill that you can then apply as entrepreneurship evolves as we move into the future. And with that, I want to say thank you for your time, and I look forward to the discussion. afterwards. And yes, maybe just to reiterate, entrepreneurship takes time, patience, and a village. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Our next speaker is Amani Dube, who is CEO and founder of Seacrest Investments, a digital solutions business aimed at empowering entrepreneurs through various digital platforms, and is the founder of the Inclusive Economy Summit. She is also a beneficiary of youth entrepreneurship and mentorship programs. Before Amani takes the floor, I'd like to remind participants that you can start writing down your comments or questions directed to each of the speakers in the chat box, because we'll be starting with the discussion after Amani speaks. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Njabulo. And afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I couldn't agree with Ali more. I'm Amani Dube. As Njabulo has introduced me, the founder and CEO of Seacrest Investments, which is a digital marketing agency focused on assisting SMMEs move their businesses from normal marketing and advertising into a digital platform. As a professional in the digital space, lots of my challenges were the understanding of support structures within the government and in the private sector as to what was digital marketing as a whole. My challenges led to me wanting to give up, wanting to let go, because I was misunderstood, I was misplaced. Fortunately for me, I had an interaction with Love Life and NYDA a few years ago, and Chris Mohabe, who was at National at the NYDA, was presenting and just informing us about the products and services of the NYDA. That got me back to life and thinking of ways in which I could, tap into the NYDA and see if they could assist me in my business. Fortunately for me, it didn't take any time whatsoever. And I would encourage anyone who's youth and an entrepreneur to really, really engage with the NYDA and try and find out the products and services that are available to us. It's a matter of information, because I think that those are one of the elements that we all are, or most youth are not privy to. Moving forward, it took about 3 weeks between engagements between the NYDA and myself, with submissions, to the point where they funded me or granted me equipment for my company. At that point, I was making bare minimal, and through their assistance, I managed to employ 5 other youth that were in the ghetto, So moving forward, we're able to grow the company in that manner, and COVID hit. After COVID hit, through still the assistance of the NYDA and them having that patience and going back to me and asking me, do you need any more assistance? Which I think was another key factor in the execution strategies and assistance that is given by government entities or cohorts that we get involved in. Moving forward, then I formulated the whole concept of having an inclusive economy in Daba. So what happens at the Inclusive Economy in Daba is a platform in which government, academias, corporates, and entrepreneurs sit together and discuss ways in which we're able to work together inclusively towards the economy and the growth of the economy. I like to think myself as a socio-economic entrepreneur, because my heart is centered around the growth of job creation, seeing the digital space and the 4IR movement grow as I am part of it, and also have conversations, interactional conversations such as this. To Ali's point, township economy is a huge factor, and rural economy is a huge factor in our economy, and the support is much needed in those areas. But the whole concept of youth entrepreneurship, or the youth in entrepreneurship, is going into the city And it would be a great time for us to start moving away from just that concept and growing the economy within the rural areas and providing those services. I host a digital workshop that provides my expertise to entrepreneurs within the rural and township economy, just to give them the skills to grow their companies or their businesses, or even broaden their horizon in terms of thinking and doing towards such things. So I'm very, very honored and privileged to be part of this panel. I'm a storyteller, so mine is very, very quick and short. And thank you for having me today. And thank you again, Wasim and your team, for your support, your endless support. It's much, much appreciated. It has gone a long way and assisted so many youths that I've been in touch with personally. Thank you so much. Back to you, Njabulo.
Thank you, Amani. So I think we'll move to Q&A. I see Eli's hand is up. Is Eli? Oh, you've raised.
I was just clapping and showing appreciation for all the speakers.
No, thank you. Yeah, much appreciation to all of the speakers. We'll now move towards the discussion. I don't see any questions on the chat box. So while people sort of prepare themselves to ask, I'll abuse my position as chair and sort of say, I'll ask one question to the whole panel maybe, because I think it's a broad question that I've been sort of thinking about after Wasim's presentation, and then a general point. So maybe let me start with the general point. I sort of worked I was part of the coordinating team that worked on this book project, and so I've read in much detail Dumi and Lauren's chapter and Eli's chapter in the book. So I was quite struck by the presentation that Wasim gave, because it was new to me, and I was struck by how you made it seem like that entrepreneurship isn't really something that young people in the township sort of engage in. In the slides, it was sort of seen that it was something, or some activities, at least some entrepreneurial activities were engaged in by migrants. I don't know if I read your slides sort of correctly, but this point about sort of getting particularly young Black people into entrepreneurship, and sort of getting them disalienated from the notion of entrepreneurship, is something that also comes up in Eli's chapter. So I just wanted to sort of make that point about sort of, and this is also linked to my question around the township economy, right? Which sort of came up now, especially towards the end of Amani's contribution. It's such a huge sort of factor in discourse around South Africa's economy, but I find that it isn't something that is articulated, right? It's something that's sort of said, and we all are sort of meant to assume that we know what it is, when it actually isn't said that this is the township economy, these are the parameters of the township economy, this is what constitutes, activity, right? Because I mean, as Amani was sort of alluding to, there is sort of criticism that can be leveled towards like a township economy centric sort of approach, because just Black people in this country don't only live in the township, right? There's the rural economy. What about the rural economy? What about the economy in our CBDs, right? Which so if we're going to talk about Black economic transformation, we can't always be fixated around the township economy, because we miss so many other parts. But so my question is, do we still need the township economy with the township economy? What is to be done with it? Should we still keep it? Do we rethink it? So those are my sort of questions to the whole panel. I don't know if anyone from the audience would like to raise their hand and ask a question. Oh, I see the chat box. Oh, we have Elton. Elton, take the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me, Jabulo?
We can hear you fine. We can hear you just fine.
Perfect. First of all, let me start off by saying thank you very much for this presentation. It's very inspiring. I myself am an inspired entrepreneur. I have a deep passion for entrepreneurship, but it's funny because this morning I was actually thinking, what am I doing with my life? Because the journey I'm on is very, very difficult. It's very, very hardening, and it's very, very complex. I'd also like to just say I appreciate Ms. Amani Dube's presentation and speaking regarding the NYDA, which is an organization I myself have approached. My question is purely regarding the NYDA in the sense of I applied for a grant. Ms. Dube, I'm sure you're familiar with the Threshold 2, which is the one that I currently qualify for. And my grant was being processed from last year, November. And to this day, I haven't received anything. I am communicating with the individual, the official that I have from the NYDA. And, to the benefit of the NYDA, I don't want to be, too difficult on them, but they have mentioned that, listen, there's a whole bunch of other people that they're processing, and it's going to take some time before they can actually get to me. And so, that's fine. I respect that. But at the same time, as an entrepreneur, you're thinking, but, I really need to get started and my business is waiting and it's in limbo. So it's just that question that I'm deeply concerned about regarding, the assistance that I definitely need. So that's just one of my personal concern regarding the NYDA. My business is going to be focused on exactly what has been discussed today, the township economy, reviving the township, because there's plenty of opportunities within the township economy. So that's just purely what I'm focused on. And that's just one of the reasons why that I just wanted to share my 2 cents worth of. So, but so far, guys, I really appreciate the presentation. It's really inspiring. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Elton. Let me read some of the questions in the chat box, and then I think Wasim, I think there's a question for you. I also have my question to you, Wasim. Interesting to hear Wasim's policy suggestions regarding simplifying the bureaucratic process of hiring youth. Any thoughts or ideas regarding the implementation of these and other suggestions on the part of the Department of Small Business Development? And then our Prof. Susan Boysen, our Director of Research, has a question to the panel generally. Should Operation Dudula be seen as a quest to access better or more informal trade positions by youth, among others, or perhaps more of a knee-jerk xenophobic reaction to feelings of economic disempowerment and exclusion? So that's a question to the whole panel. Wasim, and then the whole panel can just come in on this round.
Yeah, thanks, Njabul. And I think, thanks very much. I think some loaded questions, interesting questions in there, right? So I'll start off with your sort of initial point about enterprises and how we support enterprises in South Africa. Yeah, and I think if you look at it, we like pretty pathways in South Africa, which is how you'll see our national budget and our ideas are aligned to that pretty pathway. So we see the pathway of through school into higher education, and that being either into entrepreneurship. Lots of graduates become entrepreneurs, others become employees, right? And you see how it's structured around support through NASFAS, our strong CETA support system to support graduates and internships, right? But what we need to accept that pathway doesn't exist for many young people, right? It's different for many young people, and therefore we have to see pathways into enterprises, and particularly informal and micro enterprises, as a core part of what we want to achieve as a country. That sort of brings me to my second point, is to say, even where we have entrepreneurship activities or support, those are heavily layered towards formal-based enterprises. We like you to have CIPC registration and a business bank account and a formal business address, whereas we need to recognize that that doesn't always exist for many entrepreneurs in South Africa. What is wrong with you running and scaling a home-based business? You know, why do you need a business bank account? And a personal bank account can do almost exactly the same thing at often lower than lower rates than what business bank accounts come at. So those are important nuances. And I also want to address the migrant immigration question, right? Because I think it often comes up in these kind of discussions. But I think what my presentation was trying to get across in a nuanced kind of view was to say, certainly there are sectors which are dominated by immigrants. The spaza shop sector, we know, is 70%, 80% dominated by foreign nationals in South Africa. Yeah. And people say that foreign nationals killed the spaza shop sector. No, they didn't. It was killed when Shoprite and Boxer and many other of those low-cost initiatives entered the township in the rural market. Yeah. What foreign nationals did was come up with their own system to take that market away from many of those multinational companies. What I was trying to get across in this presentation is that there are many sectors in South Africa which are dominated by young South Africans. Yeah, food, for example, is a massive sector where foreign nationals have very little penetration into that sector. Yeah, so how do you support more opportunities to create those kind of informal enterprises? I mean, a big thing, it attracted a lot of criticism, or let me not say criticism, debate in the State of the Nation was, if we were to introduce a universal basic income in South Africa, to what extent is that financing side hustle, micro enterprise opportunities of young people? Yeah? And I think we need to look at innovation in that space, because I think micro enterprises and informal sectors is critical to that development. Questions around efficiency and effectiveness, any questions around NYDA, what I'll do is I'll post my email in the chat group. Anyone who has a question on any or delay or anything, welcome to reach out to me, and I'll see how we can sort that out for you. I mean, I gave one example answering the last question, is that to answer sort of the last question around how we could make these incentives easier to access. I think the one example we provided in the presentation was right now the Youth Employment Service, whereby large corporates pay money into a fund, and that fund is used to subsidize youth employment. We think that could be tailored more to support small enterprises, and you have a real opportunity to be able to, by making the accreditation criteria a bit easier to access, you'd have a lot more small businesses participating, being able to uptake on the YES program, and ultimately leading to better employment outcomes in the country. Thanks, Injapur. I'm happy to give the other panelists a chance and also come back a bit later. Yeah.
Thank you, Wasim. Any of our other panelists wanna respond?
Jabulo, I'll go. Hi, Jabulo.
Sure. No, you can go ahead.
So thank you so much, Alton, and for your question. And just to respond to you on township economy, that question on township economy and the importance of it moving forward. See, based on my interaction with companies or entrepreneurs and businesses in the township sector, there's so much more to be done. So just moving away from that, you can't move away from a space where you haven't reached your ultimate goal as a country, as an economy. We are not even halfway there. There's so much within that space. There's so much money, billions that are spent within that sector or that space, which is the township economy, that we can't just let go of it and now go start just assisting the rural, not to exclude them, but it needs to be inclusive, which goes back into inclusive economy. Everyone is important. Everyone needs attention and time and space. And that is part of the job creation and the opportunities that we have in South Africa, is that there's opportunities in every space, in every sector. So nothing is null and void. And it's just, we need to be very, very careful when we start highlighting other areas and sectors and not die down and exclude other participants of the economy. Thank you.
No, thank you, Amani. I don't know if Eli, Dumi, you guys wanna take?
Maybe just to add, and why it's so important to have young entrepreneurs like Amani and even Alton on this call, is that I think that wherever the opportunities are in whichever aspect of the economy, I think it's very important to have really positive entrepreneurial role models, especially young role models. So like Amani, for example, and the more we can share those stories and tell those stories, I think the more young people will see where the opportunities are, what possibility there is, and to really then start to build interesting pathways to income for themselves and then interesting businesses too. So I think it's really important for us to support more young people, to promote more role models and to promote more stories, to really then encourage other people to see opportunities too.
Thank you, Ellie. Tumi, I don't know if you want to respond. If not, we can go to some of the other questions. I note your hand, Edmund.
Yeah, why didn't we move on to other questions? I can give input later.
Oh, okay, cool. So our executive director, Mr. Joel Nichitenze, asks or posted a question on the chat box. Says Harrington and others in the 2017 study established that there is very poor awareness of the NYDA and SEDA offerings, and only 15% of those were aware actually of those who are aware actually approach the NYDA. What more can be done in terms of mass communication? And then we have a question from Lusanda asking, are the current youth policy initiatives, do they have any major impact on dealing with youth employment? If not, what needs to be done in the short, medium, and long term? My sense, looking at the level of youth unemployment, no major impact is being realized. How can or should TVET colleges be more responsive to the challenges the panelists have raised? I currently chair a TVET college council, asking Judith Favish. And then we have a question from Kwezi, asking what is the projected turnaround time for NYDA, different types of, or for NYDA, different types of funding applications? What are the measures to reduce the waiting times? He says he asked this, or they asked this, so that applicants can know when to panic. So we have two hands, Edmund and Luvuyo. Edmund, I noted your hand first, so you'll take the floor, and then Luvuyo, you'll go after.
Thanks, Program Director. The name is Tami Mazrai. I just thought I would follow up on the comments you made on the township economy. And just to make the point that in terms of just basic entrepreneurships, opportunities will always be where people are. They are nowhere else. And if at all people are in the townships, it stands to reason that there are people who are going to have to exploit those opportunities and create their own entities. The major problem that we face as a country is that traditionally the townships were reservoirs of labor. And as a result, whilst other communities were progressing in terms of entrepreneurial orientation, entrepreneurial thinking, and just developing that mindset in which the community is a source both of consumption and production, African communities or township communities were not allowed to develop in that direction. And this was assisted by a lot of legislation that militated against Blacks being entrepreneurs. So for us to reverse the impact of apartheid, we need to stimulate entrepreneurship in every corner where there is a Black person, because at the end of the day, when you've got unemployment of 35%, it means that people must create their own jobs. Where are they going to create their own jobs if they are not, if not in the areas in which they live? The next point to make is that when there's an increase of, all right, the first point I would like to make is that in a study that we did about 10 years ago, we found that of about 3 billion rand that is spent by township residents, the number is much more higher now, that is spent by the residents of Soweto. 70% leaks out and strengthens the economies of Randburg, Sandton, and Johannesburg. And only 24% circulates in Soweto. And that's why the development of entrepreneurship in Soweto has sort of been behind. The other benefits of developing the township economy is that it's going to lead to the emergence of local ecosystems and local value chains. And it is these ecosystems and value chains that result in a multiplier effect, because as the rand circulates in the township, it creates more opportunities. I'm sorry to take such a long time, but I thought that I must make that explanation to show that the township economy is crucial in the economic revitalization of our country. Thanks very much.
No, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tami Mazwai. No, don't worry about taking too much time. We're glad to have you as part of this conversation. Someone who's done immense work in this particular field. Thank you for joining us. Luvuyo, please take the floor.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, awesome, because I'm driving. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to share some comments. I think I wanted to remark, so I'm representing the Black Business Council as the chair of the Youth Economic Development Committee. And I think for me, and I'll even say as a collective, it is really important we do take a value chain approach into developing any space in any economy. Particularly then when they reflect on the opportunities for job creation for young people in the township or any other space within the sector, becomes really critical to then evaluate what is happening in certain industries before we even look at some of the sunrise economies of the future, right? Because I think if we now dig back and then look at the state of the township economy, you then realize the certain basic access issues that make the township economy fall behind. You can't be talking about digital economy if access to digital network becomes difficult and expensive. So how do we enable that to enhance e-learning, to enhance e-services? Because a lot of young people, and we've engaged with a lot based in the township, have actually developed some amazing solutions, but it becomes very, very difficult for them to translate that into accessible platforms for the youth in the township that they're trying to service. Secondly, as well, I think on the comment around the TVET colleges, what we've then seen holistically is that there's a mismatch between supply and demand. And by supply and demand, I mean that when the sectors or industry is going forward, the education system is still falling behind and therefore developing a skills pool that is actually unemployable. And I think this is where there needs to be a real alignment with higher education and even basic education to developing skill sets that are actually required now in the immediate term in these existing industries, and then in an alignment to these sunrise industries around the skills required for the future. I think this becomes very, very critical to really utilizing platforms like the YES, like the Harambes of the world, who are there to fast track employment, but it makes their job harder if they're dealing with a skills pool that is actually unusable in the market because the industry is going one way, right? If we're not having skill sets that are supporting the BPO networks, the supporting the digital space, then really what is then the point? Right? Because industry, unfortunately, is moving with or without us. So how are we then aligning our education systems accordingly? And then lastly, on the policy side, which I think is very important, and is actually quite a very, very tough topic at the moment regarding transformation and procurement policies with public sector. Public sector is the largest employer. Public sector is also the largest contributor for SMEs and big business. So if we're having policies that make it very, very difficult for Black businesses to get new opportunities, it becomes very, very difficult as Luvuyo, as an SME owner, to potentially grow his business through a tender contract that's going to enhance his business growth and experience that he then requires to get more business in the private sector. So by being holistic, it does become very, very important to understand where are these pillars that are policy hindrances or barriers, and where are we falling short in terms of the skill set required in the market to develop these economies that we are seeing are lagging behind, such as rural and the township economy. And I think that's it. And then lastly, my other question relates to Madam Dube. She mentioned some events or summit. Are there any other events coming up in the near with our members?
Okay. Thank you, Luvuyo. Judith, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. And thanks for the very interesting presentations. So as I said in the chat, I'm the chair of one of the TVET College Councils. And I know I posted a very broad question, which was really on trying to get feedback on how colleges can become more responsive to some of the issues and challenges that we've been talking about. I know it might be not possible to get too much feedback today, and thanks to the two people who've already responded to me. I'll put my name and email address in the chat. So if anybody else is interested in pursuing this conversation, it would be great to hear from you. But I'm just seeking feedback on how the colleges can actually be more responsive institutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Judith. I think because we've had, just a lot of questions during this round. Let's sort of have responses, and then we'll get back to the questions that are in the chat box and other questions that may arise after responses. I don't know who wants to start. Wasim, Dumi, you didn't go the first round, so maybe if we can start with you.
Okay, sure. I'm sorry, again, I have a scratchy throat. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I just want to make a few small comments. First, there's a question about, what has been successful in terms of youth employment policies or policies to promote youth employment. And I think I just wanted to make 2 points related to that. And one of them is a broader point. And that is, and again, this is related to the work I did for this chapter, but also work that I did as part of a systematic review that I did on youth employment for a separate project, youth employment policy. And that is that, I think part of what I would suggest is that youth employment, the problem of youth employment is a facet of the broader problem of unemployment and employment in South Africa. And I think, the question really is, if you want to support youth employment, you have to strengthen initiatives to support employment generally. And then to understand what additionally needs to be done to support young people, as opposed to focusing all of the employment initiatives generally as a youth employment problem. So again, I always reflect on this idea that if you look at the demographic statistics, 1 in 2 South Africans is a young person in terms of the definition of youth. And so where is the line between youth policy and policy generally? And so most of the work of government could be considered youth policy, right? Because it's affecting the lives of most South Africans. And so I don't know that we should be thinking about it as youth employment policy. What is that doing for youth? Or if we should be focusing on some of the challenges or around employment policy generally and initiatives generally that are targeted at improving employment, and then thinking about how those could be, how the work of those departments could be directed towards ensuring that young people are able to benefit from the work that's being done to support employment. And so similarly, and then related to this idea of what works and what doesn't work in terms of youth policy, one of the challenges I experienced in looking at what policies have been implemented and whether they've been successful or not is that there's often a very limited sort of evidentiary basis to understand whether or not they've been successful. And this is now, me with my academic hat on. But one of the big challenges is, you often have all agencies working in the sector describing what has been done. So this amount of money has been distributed, this amount of training has gone out. But the challenge in trying to understand whether or not that's successful or whether or not that worked is that, you can't just count the number of people that have been employed or the amount of money that's gone out, because we don't have anything to compare it against, right? So however much money or time and effort you put into X could have gone to Y. And we can't know whether or not X has been successful without thinking about the alternative ways we could have used the money, the time, the resources. And so, at the most basic, you could think about, what if you just gave all of the money directly to people, right? Like, which would have been more successful? That's like a cash benchmarking exercise. And that's not really that may not make sense when you're thinking about government's work. That's kind of something that, development agencies might think about as a counterfactual. But without that counterfactual in mind, it becomes really hard to understand what has worked and what hasn't worked. And so that is just, the academical to think about, as we look at policies, how do we really understand what has worked and what hasn't worked? Obviously, we care about the sort of outcomes at the end of this, how many people are employed, and that's important. But when we think about the effectiveness of specific policies and interventions, it can be very hard to evaluate if something's actually successful relative to the alternatives. So yeah, that's just my little input.
Thank you, Tumi. Could I, maybe ask Wasim to maybe directly respond to Dr. Mazwai's comment, which was also in response to my comment about sort of the linkages. My comments were deliberately sort of provocative because I wanted us to get to, so that we could sort of get and unpack what we mean by the township economy. So I'd like for us to sort of pick up from Dr. Mazwai's comment about the linkages and the spillages, that the township economy has with other parts of the city and the broader South African economy.
Yeah, thanks, Njabulo, for that difficult question. So I think you've got to look at entrepreneurship through 3 different lenses or 4 different lenses and they're all interconnected to one another, right? Is that to develop or create a young entrepreneur in South Africa, you've got to have some level of access to skills development. And when we look at skills, coming across in the research is that young entrepreneurs possess 2 skills, right? Generally, a stronger level of financial skills, and I don't mean you need to be a high-level mathematician or an accountant, but some level of financial skills do generate towards being a better entrepreneur. And the other skill, technical or softer skill that we see is resilience. The majority of entrepreneurs who we seem to succeed in business have a strong degree of resilience. Adding to that is you need some access to finance, right? One way or another, you have to create a system where access to finance is available for young people, whether that's bootstrapping, whether that's through commercial lending institutions, DFIs. Access to finance is a piece in the puzzle. And then probably the most difficult one to tackle is access to market linkages. And all of this needs to exist in an ecosystem to be able to support young entrepreneurs. Now, if one looks at potential activities that could change the landscape and not only looking, like you say, at township or rural markets in isolation, what are sort of catalytic interventions that can make a difference, right? One, possibly the circulation of money in local economies. We know, for example, how social grants enter many of these markets, but exit straight away, right? So the population of money, and here there's a real space for digital and tech. Commercial solutions like WhatsApp Pay that reduce the cost of doing business in a non-cash kind of format can make a big difference, right? Secondly, tech-enabled platforms. You look at the success that Sweep South or Kandua has had, for example. Those are potential access to market opportunities that allow young entrepreneurs or micro enterprises to scale their own enterprise. And then I think there's a huge opportunity in connectivity as well. Part of the employment program or employment stimulus is a program to provide low-cost broadband to most vulnerable households. And I think that has a potential to also unlock, if you provide connectivity at a much more subsidized rate in South Africa, I think you could unlock a huge amount of benefit for micro informal entrepreneurs. So, I mean, I know it's a difficult question. I'd love to see other opinions on the matter as well. But that's sort of the views that we have on it. I just want to respond to two other quick questions. I think the one about potential employment policies that have succeeded in South Africa. I mean, you look at one that the research does suggest is the employment tax incentive, right? I mean, high-level credible researchers have indicated that the employment tax incentive supports close to 1 million economy. And I think that was part of the rationale behind President Ramaphosa widening the incentive in the State of the Nation 2022 for more participants to take part in it, and that contributing towards employment. And I think there was also a point from John Najitenze around the access to programs, and he mentioned NYD and CEDA and I think we fully agree is that the knowledge of these products and services is not always out there. I often say to our board is that sometimes there's a disincentive to communicate, because you create sometimes a lot of supply or a lot of demand that you can't fulfill. But we are trying to address that concern. So part of what many people in this group are part of is this National Pathway Management Network, sayouth.mobi, where we've already got close to 2 million young people signed off, and where we're really trying to aggregate demand-side opportunities for young people in an inclusive and a free manner. And this can include NYDA, CEDA, but a multiplicity of other partners in the private sector and civil society. Thanks, Njabulani.
Thank you, Wasim. Eli?
I wanted to comment on one of the audience members raised a very, very good point about how are we teaching skills that are required not only for market, but for the future. And I think that's going to become something that's fundamental to not only how we are addressing education at the early stage, Judy, to your point around TVET colleges too, but I think what is it that we really need to be teaching young people? And coming from my experience in entrepreneurship, I think teaching that entrepreneurial mindset is fundamental, because it allows them to be very adaptable and resilient and to really see different opportunities in different times. But I think coupled with that, and Wasim raised the point now about how young entrepreneurs, you've seen them to be more resilient and perhaps better with their financial literacy is better. I think there are a couple of things that are very important skills for the future. One is that entrepreneurial mindset. Two is a financial literacy. Three is a digital literacy. So I think one of the audience members also raised that point around it's the digital barriers that are really impacting opportunities for young people around entrepreneurship, around accessing gig work, around many other forms of employment. So I think if we can create or bring down some of the digital barriers that exist and improve connectivity, as one of the initiatives Wasim was mentioning now too, that suddenly opens up a whole new world of opportunity that will equal the playing field, but then also allow young people to be able to use the other skills that they've acquired to connect into a much broader entrepreneurial and income generating ecosystem. And I think maybe underpinning this too is also this idea of, with adaptability, with having improved digital skills, with connecting with more people in broader ecosystems, how are we also teaching what I like to call almost a readiness for this future of work? So some of the softer skills become really important around the well-being, but also how are we teaching things around communication? We have this idea of gig work readiness. There are going to be so many more digital jobs. How are you teaching being able to communicate with people potentially from all over the world, managing your own time, managing the instability of finances, even within an entrepreneurship role? That's really important. So I think this idea of, as more digital opportunities become important, become accessible, it's also going to become more important to equip young people, not only with that literacy, but also the readiness to be able to deal with those kinds of opportunities. So I think, yeah, the big point here is there are a lot of new skills that will prepare young people for the future of work. And so a lot of our role is really around how are we revisiting the way we teach, how are we revisiting education, how are we revisiting entrepreneurial support organizations and what they do, and how can we really enhance our offerings to support better. And also how are we reviewing or even viewing our idea of what entrepreneurship means. Have we looked more, gone from the traditional view to what are some of the other opportunities that are becoming available in that entrepreneurial space. So yeah, those are my 2 cents with those future skills are hugely important. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Amani, I don't know if you want to respond.
Yes, sure. Just to touch on the whole digitalization conversation, is that a lot of times, I mean, from a personal point of view, I found very many challenges in communicating what it is that I do to what I would call backward thinking, generally within the government sector, because digitalization is misunderstood. I've approached so many, and this is another pointer that I'd like for all the entrepreneurs that are with us today to never forget is, for the mere fact that you dare to dream, your dream is valid. Don't give up on it. I've approached so many government entities, CETA, just for accreditations, for an example. But my spec of work is not within anything that has to do with them because it's a new thing, fairly. Digitalization, again, with the workshops that I do, is afford skills development of skills. So I transfer the skills through digital marketing development skills. And what I then do is approach governments and private sectors to donate their old computers and laptops, and then at least equip those kids with those valuable assets, such as, because you find in so many spaces, especially in rural areas where people are graduates, but they hardly know how to use the functionality of a laptop, for an example. So if you're transferring skills, it has to go from the bottom to the top. It's a very doable initiative, but we do need the supports from governance and the understanding thereof, and allowing companies that have these experiences and expertise to go back and re-strategize on the execution plans on how do we digitalize our future generation and assist them in moving forward in that way. And for Luvuyo's question on events as well, I am hosting another inclusive economy in Daba on the 21st of August in Johannesburg. Topical, so the topics this year will be on agro and agriculture, and fintech, and also mining and energy. That would be all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Amani. I note Elton Piri's hand. Please take the floor.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jabulo. I just have 2 questions. The first question I'd like to address to Mr. Kareem, and then the second will be addressed to all the panel that are present if you'd like to engage with that. Mr. Kareem, in your presentation, so you mentioned that, you highlighted how our current economy is actually focused on much more heavier industries, which is a valid point. This is exactly what we're seeing. So I just wanted to find out, in terms of what suggestions might you have, or any of the panel that are listening, how do we then redirect that attention to the smaller businesses? Yes, there have been quite a few examples that have been made. There have been the endowers that we've spoken of. But in terms of, getting the momentum going, how do we then transfer that type of attention in all those industries towards the much more smaller businesses? Because, for an example, a bank will offer much more smaller loans, or a banking account that is much more suitable to small businesses. So there's much less in terms of payments, monthly fees, and so on, that will be able to support the small business. But that's as much as a bank can do. Remember, a bank also needs to make a profit from it. So that's not really helping in the long term in terms of a small business. So my question to Mr. Karim is basically that: how do we then bring that attention to the small businesses in terms of not only focusing it on a heavy industry, but also focusing on the SMEs to ensure that they also get their way across? And then my second question will be to all members of the panel. A perfect example would be the cannabis industry, for example. How do we protect such industries from big corporations that have money, that can easily enter the space and take that opportunity away from small businesses? If you recall, earlier this year, the president did mention in his SONA address that the cannabis industry is going to be much less regulated. Well, not necessarily not less regulated, but it's going to be eased so that small businesses and employment can be created. But at the same time, you have to worry about the big industries that have been running the cannabis industry for much longer time, that could easily just jump in and take these opportunities away. Remember, the cannabis industry is a multi-billion-dollar with the capital D industry. So there's plenty of opportunities to be created. It's not just necessarily rolling a blunt and getting high. It's about medicinal uses. It's about soaps that could be used. So how do we protect that type of industry from not being hijacked, for lack of a better word, from big organizations? Yeah, that's pretty much my regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elton. I don't know if we have another hand. And then I'll move on to the questions in the chat box, which, as I noticed, have to do with the rural areas. So yeah, so there's a comment from Ronald saying you should consider helping young people to start incubations at the rural areas in terms of lack of education and information. So that's a suggestion to the NYDA. My colleague, Dr. Heidi Brooks, has a questions asking how can entrepreneurship and interventions target young people in rural areas more directly, given concerns among some youth about their distance from economic centers, infrastructure, and advanced technology. And then we have another question from Lusanda asking, what is the scale on youth development mainstreaming between the public and private sector? So asking about the scale. And then we have a comment from Clotilde saying, at Youth Capital, we are looking into the role of social capital for young entrepreneurs. If you are a business mentor or able to connect us with programs that connect young entrepreneurs with social capital, please feel free to get in touch on the email address. So for business mentors, there's a request for your sort of engagement there on the chat box. So if I don't see any further hands, so I'll hand it over to our panel, and then yeah, we'll wrap up. I think this will be the last round. Yeah, so back to the panel. Wasim.
Thanks, Njapura. I've got a problem in this platform today here. But I think there's some really great questions in there. And I'll start off with what Elton said, right? Is to say, well, how do we ensure the thriving of the success of small business against big business? Yeah. And I say there's when we talk about structural reform in the economy, I don't think we always direct that at big business, right? Let me give you an example. I think there's a lot of good work that's happening in agriculture and past digital and tech, where I think there's been a lot of good work done with industry. Agriculture is seen as the next big ticket where we can create a lot of direct and indirect economic opportunities. Yeah, but there's still a level of uncertainty around land tenure and land rights that if you could resolve that through policy and legislation, that could be a lever that unlocks a lot of support for small businesses. Similarly, if you look at improved infrastructure around road and transportation networks, again, that provides massive levers to small businesses to be able to drive their exports, which are necessary for their sustainability and their growth, right? So very much structural reforms need to be inclusive in their nature to support both big and small business. Yeah. And then again, I mean, when you talk about cannabis, I think it's a massive opportunity, right? But so we often paint this versus Goliath scenario of small business versus big business, but often small business have factors which allow them to succeed better than big business. Agility for one, right? Knowledge of the sector for two. I think we know that cannabis agriculture has been going on since the 1950s in rural parts of the country, for example. All of the stuff we used to smoke when we were younger, I'm pretty sure it used to come from somewhere, you know. So there's a degree of agility that allows these entrepreneurs, these small businesses who have the lay of the land and are able to move faster than multinationals. But it's only if the legislation and the regulation allows them to be able to succeed. Yeah. And I think addressing those barriers is critical for us to be able to drive success. So if policy and legislation is only catered towards big business, then that's the outcomes you'll see, right? And that's why it is important for small businesses' voices to be represented in different platforms. And it's also important for developmental institutions to be able to support not only financial support, but also support elements such as allowing young farmers to get their products accredited, to get their products supported. So I think that's critical. Just on some of the other questions, sorry, I'm losing the track a little bit, but you know, I mean, scale between the players and the private sector. Again, I'll come back to the ETI. I think there's a good collaboration between public and private sectors. Again, the skills development levy has provided a pathway for many young people, from graduates to learnership programs, into more sustainable forms of employment. Again, the YES program, 70,000 work experiences in 2 years, I don't think is anything to be scoffed at. What I think we need to do is look at what is working in the system and support those more effectively, so that opportunities which are operating at scale, how do you double and triple the scale that's already being achieved? Because I think that's how we'll make a difference in the economy. Yeah, Chair, can I pause my feedback there for now?
Okay, no. Thank you. Thank you, Wasim. Eli, I don't know if you want to respond.
I don't have any additional comments at this point, so I'm happy to hand over to someone else.
I'll ask who if any of our panelists want to respond. If not, we can move to the closing remarks.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment.
Sure,
so I think just two quick comments. Firstly, you know, on this idea about heavy industry getting more policy attention. You know, I mean, I think there's a broader question about what role smaller businesses and enterprise play in the broader economy. And so I don't think, you know, it has to be one taking over from the other, but to the extent that people want to increase the space for smaller businesses and entrepreneurs, I think part of it comes back to sort of political economy story, where it's easier for people in more, you know, established industries to organize, to engage policymakers, especially if there are fewer of them and they have the networks and financial resources to engage. So I think one aspect of this speaks to is the importance of people in the entrepreneurial space. I know it's difficult, it's challenging for people who, you know, might be competitors in some ways to come together, but nevertheless, finding ways to mobilize to support their interests in policy discussions, right? And I think having platforms where people are able to collectively say, you know, this is what we want in a clear and substantiated way, increases the likelihood that those views will have an impact in policy circles and in policy discussions. And that's just a sort of political economy perspective. But and there are obviously reasons that is difficult, and so you have to overcome greater obstacles when people are operating from a larger number of smaller, more diverse interests. So to try to organize that can be difficult, but I think that's an important step in sort of amplifying the impact that people can have in policy discussions. And then the second comment I would make is just because this is something that, you know, is close to my heart and I think a lot about, is on, you know, what works in terms of youth employment policy, and the youth wage subsidy, the employment tax incentive was raised. And I was part of a group that was evaluating that initially. And so definite, I want to give credit to the National Treasury for inviting outside academics to come in, as well as having their own internal research team to try to provide a rigorous analysis. But what I and another outside researcher working independently found was that there was actually very limited evidence of a positive effect, right? So there was no evidence of a negative effect. So people were concerned that it would displace older workers, and there wasn't support for that. But there was also not a lot of support to show that it was having a positive effect on generating employment. And that comes back to the fact that the policy became available to all firms at once, right? So it was really hard to say what the counterfactual was, what would have happened in the absence of this program. And so, my research suggested that actually firms that were hiring young people at high rates before the program and that were growing before the introduction of the program were the ones who were more likely to use the program. And so you can identify the effect of the policy on employment outcomes. But nevertheless, it's understandable that governments don't want to randomly assign, who's going to get this policy. That if you think it's going to work, that you'll want to give it to everybody. So it's understandable that it becomes difficult to really identify the effects. But just to throw that out there, I think that at least the initial evaluation picture was more mixed. There was some indication that smaller firms might have been able to benefit from more than larger firms, but the larger firms were the ones who were using it mostly. And so it gets really murky to try to unpick what is the effect. And then again, when you look at the amount of money, the cost of that program, because there is a cost, how could that money have been spent, right? There's that bigger question, like what are the alternatives and what can you get for that? And maybe that would have been something that you could have maximized or had a greater employment impact. So yeah, just to throw that out there is my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dumi. Amani, I don't know if you want to respond.
No, nothing from my side. Thank you.
Okay, cool. If you don't have anything else to say, I think we can move on to the set of closing remarks that we have prepared by Asanda Luaka, who is the executive chairperson of the board of the NYDA. Please take it away, Asanda. Is Asanda on the call? I know that we were struggling earlier. There we are. I think you're muted. Oh. We really can't hear you. No, we can't hear you. We can see you perfectly, but we can't hear you. No, we still can't hear you. Can you check your sound settings? Cool. Okay. Okay, that wasn't expected. Okay. I don't know if while we wait for Asanda to get sorted, I don't know if we have any more questions, comments from the floor.
May I make a comment?
Sure.
I just would like to say to all of the young entrepreneurs that are on this call and to everyone who's doing work to support them, just a huge appreciation and respect and admiration. I think, being an entrepreneur is an amazing career choice. It's a brave career choice, and it's really essential for the growth of economies and the growth of communities and people. And so it's amazing the young people who choose that route. So I just want to say huge respect to you. And again, to all of the people that are supporting young people on that journey. Like, again, it's an amazing role that you have, the support that you give is invaluable. And so just want to say, thank you. NYDA, policy makers, there is such a big village that's responsible for the growth of young entrepreneurs. And so just a shout out for me to thank everybody who is involved in that. So hopefully the next conversation we have in a couple of years really sees so much growth amongst our young entrepreneurial communities and some real forward movement in terms of the skills development that we provide.
Thank you, Eli. I see Dr. Mazwai's hand. Please take the floor, Dr. Mazwai.
I just thought I must suggest, Chair, that if you can have a similar interaction, but only on the township economy, township and rural economy, there might be a lot of benefit, because one of the problems that are there is that people see the township or rural economies as an extension of the CBD, whether it's the Tshwane or Johannesburg CBD or Umzimkhulu and so on. Yet, I mean, all these contexts, I mean, differ in many respects, and it might help us perhaps just to have this deeper focus on the township and rural economies. What are the potentials? What are the challenges? How can these challenges be overcome, and so on? It would benefit the country a great deal. That's the suggestion I wanted to make to Mistra. But thanks very much for a very informative session. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mazwai. I think my superiors are on the call, so I think that your suggestion will be taken up by the relevant structures. And knowing how things at Mistra work, I think you should expect an email from us very soon. Us. So I don't know if Asanda is back on the call and we can all hear her. Asanda?
Hi, colleagues. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Let me just try to switch on my video. I've had to use my colleague's device. I'm not too sure if I am audible and visible.
No, we can see and hear you perfectly.
All right. Okay. Apologies for that. Technology seems to have failed me this afternoon. So I had prepared my closing remarks on another gadget. So I'm just trying to use both laptops here. But no, thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you to the participants for really enriching inputs. So I think one, just catching or grasping from some of the inputs that have been made, this idea of adapting a youth lens to entrepreneurship cannot be truer now more than ever. So there was an op-ed, an opinion piece that was written by the Director of Operations at Mistra. I think it was published last year, if I'm not mistaken. And the op-ed really pointed out, some staggering statistics, particularly as it relates to entrepreneurship in general, but SMMEs in particular. And, some of these stats showed that the SMME sector employs just 28% of the total workforce. Now, the article further pointed out that of this 28% of these, let me start. Yeah, so 28 SMMEs employ 28% of the total workforce. Now, of these, there's a small percentage of these businesses that are run by young people. Now, in translating it into just facts and statistics, I just tried to do the maths quickly in my head, and what it translated to was about 7-8% of these businesses in South Africa are run by young people. Now we've got your NDP, the National Development Plan, that really targets, that has set targets point that, in order to achieve full employment in the country by 2030, the country needs to create about 11 million jobs. Now, critical to this would then be what role can SMMEs play in as realizing and achieving these targets. And particularly then what becomes important is what role do young people play in the sector? That should equally be a priority. So it's true that we believe in the power of entrepreneurship as well as young people. South Africa has a youth bulge of over 20 million of our citizens in this country are young people. And therefore, we need to be at the forefront of every discussion and solutions. So as it particularly relates to this topic, and at the NYDA, we really try and encourage the spirit of entrepreneurship to help us tackle some of the greatest challenges that we face in the country. Now, as some of us are aware, the NYDA was really established to be this single unitary structure that's able to address youth development across all spheres of government, national, provincial, as well as the local level. So the main aim really is to make youth development part and parcel of what other line departments are delivering, where we get to a point where performance agreements have youth targets as a performance agreement. Now, our role, therefore, is to remove barriers to success and to assist with the development as well as the delivery of success factors. Now, as we know, South Africa is one of the few countries in Africa that have illustrated, this concerted commitment to youth development. And this is supported by evidenced youth policy institutions. Now, as we know, this year marks 28 years since, the democratic dispensation. And in as much as we can say, a lot has been achieved, there's still a lot that we can do in the foreseeable future. But what becomes important is, particularly issues of youth development need to be part and parcel of the transformation agenda of this country, and particularly the South African government, in as far as, ensuring that we reach our envisioned targets. But when we look at, youth economic participation, as well as the transformation of the sector, South Africa is really faced with the economic participation of young people, which really inhibits the country's economic development and imposes a larger burden on the state to provide, social assistance. Now, the salient features of, the stunted participation are high persistent levels of youth unemployment, as well as low entrepreneurial activities amongst young people. Now, the problem in the area of economic participation is really characterized by three of the following that I'll speak to. One would be the issue of low labor force participation by the youth. Two would be, high unemployment, as well as the low early stage entrepreneurial activity. Now, at the NYDA, we have supported a range of youth-owned enterprises as well as cooperatives. Now, many youth-owned enterprises have benefited from procurement as well as enterprise development programs, and I'm really pleased here this afternoon are either beneficiaries of some of the products and services that we make available, or young people that are in need of those particular products and services. But equally, what I'd want to mention is that when we look at job creation in its entirety, scarce skills as well as those required for our sustainable growth are identified in NDP. Now, the plans will have to be complemented with, your infrastructure investments and training, as well as, as well as trainings in institutions of higher learning. Now, I think it was Judith who had posed the fundamental question about how can we get TVETs as well as institutions of higher learning to be more responsive to youth development. And for me, where South African institutions cannot produce the required quantities as well as qualities, we need to rely on, international as well as industry partnerships as possible areas for unlocking, the necessary output that we envision. Now, such areas for unlocking as well as upscaling potential youth development include areas of, your oceans economy, your creative economy, areas of the fourth industrial revolution, manufacturing, agricultural and agro-processing, tourism, as well as beneficiation. But what becomes important is that we need to be emphatic in ensuring that 25% of the above mentioned or the above identified areas should be occupied by young people. Additionally, if we need to have a focused skills plan targeting your specific sectors, should be developed as well as implemented. Now, at the NYDA, we've helped small businesses really be able to expand into new markets. We've also been able to provide business management training for young people. We've connected emerging entrepreneurs with mentors as well as networks. We've expanded access to capital with other development finance partnerships. And we've also offered grants and vouchers to startup businesses. But as part of our concerted efforts to fight unemployment, poverty, and inequality, as well as ensuring that young people are active players in the mainstream economy, the NYDA has also partnered with your Harambee and your Youth Employment Service to adopt the Presidential Pathway Management Program that is spearheaded by the presidency, which has already resulted in many young people accessing the various job opportunities. But I think in closing, Program Director, what the past exposed us to is that, and I think this is, it came through as one of the salient points in the discussions this afternoon, was that the nature of work has evolved. And this requires us to really adapt and be agile to this changing ecosystem. Now, as your digital literacy is upscaled, now we ought to be really cautioned to ensure that we take everyone along with us and that there are no young people that are left behind. To ensure that we create an enabling environment, particularly for young people, to be able to access markets. The participation in the mainstream economy ought to be the responsibility of all stakeholders. The president, during his State of the Nation address this year, emphasized this idea about building social compact. And the ideas around that is so that we're able to grow the economy, we're able to create jobs as well as alleviate. Now, to be effective, we know that social compact needs to include every part of our society, and young people ought to be included in that social compact. But lastly, Program Director, and I really just want to borrow from the poignant words in the chapter that was written by Ellie, and I'll quote, she said that unemployment remains the biggest thief of hope amongst young people. Now, the chapter further illustrates that, the South African National Youth Policy recognizes young people as agents for social change, economic expansion, as well as innovation. But now what remains a challenge is creating these linkages between theory and praxis and ensuring that young people and particularly youth development inculcates these factors, particularly in the space of entrepreneurship. So those are just my parting shots, and to once again extend my appreciation to Mistra as well as all the participants for the fulfilling and enriching discussions this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Asanda. On that note, I see Ellie. Oh, she's just clapping hands. On that note, I think we can close today's session. Projects at Mistra don't really end. The afterlife goes on forever. So best believe there will be another kind of forum. Hopefully it will be in person in the near future, so that we can get away from our screens and engage in person when we go back to that. But this is all just to say thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at the next engagement. And please get our books. Asanda ended off with a quote from Ellie's chapter in the Mistra book. So I think, yeah, please buy our books. Just to inculcate a reading culture, but also to to get more information. So Mistra has, as we said, this book. I don't know if you can't really see it with the background, but the book that we have, and then we also have another book which I forgot to mention, titled Beyond Entrepreneurship, Rethinking Black Business and Economic Empowerment. For me, really, this book probably started it off when you think about Mistra's work in youth entrepreneurship, particularly. The last section of this Beyond Entrepreneurship book provides two case studies, not a number of case studies of young entrepreneurs. So this is all just to say that this is ongoing work for Mistra, and we look forward to seeing you at our next discussion. We'd like to, there's a couple of people that we would specifically like to thank. At the NYDA, we would like to thank obviously our speakers, Mr. Wasim Karim and Mr. Asanda Luaka for speaking to us. We'd also like to thank Ikanyeng Masinamela for coordinating all of the speaking arrangements on the NYDA side. I would also like to thank my colleague, Dr. Heidi Brooks, the whole humanity faculty, and the whole team at Mistra, our comms team, Spogazi, Norma, and to also thank you for participating in this discussion. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thanks everybody for this great opportunity.